Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Susan Macbeth. I'm the founder and
I
owner of
don't do
Adventures
that
by
every
the Book. And I'd like to welcome you to our quarterly Adventures by the Book book club. Today, featuring two behind the glamour scenes, Brisa Carleton and Allison Pataki. It's going to be an amazing talk. I'm so excited for this. And hosting today's event is going to be one of our Adventures by the Book ambassadors, Giovanna Ionace with the Tuckahoe, New York Public Library. And she's got some of her book club patrons in the room with her. So we welcome those guys who attended in person as well. Thank you for coming. Whether you're here virtually or in person, we're glad you're here. For those of you who aren't familiar with our schedule, we hope you'll get on our mailing list. We have our next virtual event coming up on August 27th, and we do this twice a year. It's called our Pitch Fest event. And what it is we fast pitch 15 of our authors who want to share with you information about their new book so that book clubs, libraries, and readers can choose their next reads for the next coming months. So it's free to join us August 27th. Just go to our website and you can join us. I want to thank Sarah from our team who's behind the scenes, and she'll be typing in links as we're talking tonight. If you happen to be in the Southern California area, our next in-person event is going to be on June 18th. We are celebrating the 250th birthday of the United States by featuring three New York Times bestselling authors: Laura Camoy, who is going to be talking about a founding mother; Reina Grande, who's talking about a migrant heart; and Elizabeth Cobbs, who will talking about fearless women in our history. So it's themed Remember the Ladies. So you'll join us then. And as a reminder, both Allison and Brisa are Adventures by the Book authors, which means that they are on our website, available and ready for you to schedule them for book club visits. They love talking to book clubs about their books. So please learn more today. Go to our website, schedule a visit with them, and you can hear more in-depth information beyond what you're going to hear today. But for now, I'm excited to turn it over to Giovanna and welcome you all for an amazing behind the glamour scenes chat today.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be hosting tonight. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I'm in a new library in Tuckahoe, which is still in New York. It's still in Westchester County. And I have a few of our book club members here with me tonight, and many are joining us online. I have the pleasure of introducing the two authors for tonight. And then I have a number of questions, and there might be questions in the audience and in the group here that's live. So I'll start by introducing you in alphabetical order. So Brisa Carleton grew up in the Pacific Northwest before moving to Midtown Manhattan to turn her passion for musicals and flair for the dramatic into an award-winning career as a Broadway producer. 3 Tony Awards later, she continues to be active on Broadway, working on numerous productions, including Hamilton, Beautiful, and Moulin Rouge. In 2019, at the request of His
Serene Highness.
Serene, thank you. I always forget the S stands for His Serene Highness Prince Albert of Monaco. Brisa joined his foundation to lead philanthropy efforts in theater, dance, and film on behalf of his mother, Princess Grace Kelly. Most recently, she turned her entrepreneurial spirit to actual spirits, launching Literati Spirits, a premium vodka, which we don't have any tonight, unfortunately, created by book lovers for book lovers. She enjoys traveling to literary destinations with a martini in one hand and a manuscript in the other, collecting stories with her husband Mark and her chihuahua, Mr. Big. Allison Pataki is the multiple New York Times bestselling author of 11 books of historical fiction, children's books, and memoir, including the instant bestseller, The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, and the critically acclaimed Finding Margaret Fuller. Allison's novels have been translated into more than 20 foreign languages around the world and have been selected by The Today Show, Good Morning America, PBS Books, Entertainment Weekly, and other outlets as favorite and featured titles. A former news writer and producer, Allison has written for the New York Times, ABC News, the Huffington Post, USA Today, Fox News, and more. She graduated cum laude from Yale University with a major in English. a member of the Historical Novel Society, and a certified yoga instructor. Allison is a sought-after public speaker and frequent visitor to book clubs, reading groups, and other gatherings. She lives in New York with her husband and family. So, without further ado, I'm. I don't know if you wanted to say a few words about your book, or would you like to take questions?
Do you want?
Like to start up? Go ahead.
Well, I'll start only because I don't want to follow Allison because she's so fabulous and incredible. I'm just so excited to be in conversation with her.
Hey, Brisa. Have we met? Have we met in person?
We met at Samantha Woodruff's
Yes,
event.
that's right. At her lunch. Yes.
But
Yes.
I've read every one of your books.
I loved Last Call. I'm so excited to listen to you.
Thank you.
Talk all night.
No, but Susan, thank you. Giovanna, thank you. Everyone who's here. I'm a debut novelist, so all of this is still so new and so exciting. And I'm finding in this process of becoming an author that speaking with book clubs and actually talking to people who are interested in my book or have read my book is just, I mean, it blows my mind still. I pinch myself every day. So thank you all for being here. So would it be helpful if I explained what my book is and then Allison, to hand it over to Allison? So Last Call at the Savoy is about a New York party girl that moves to London to help her pregnant sister with a difficult pregnancy, and they find themselves spending a few months in the iconic Savoy Hotel, as one does. And while her sister is resting, she whiles away the hours at the cocktail bar. And there she learns the story of a real life historical woman named Ada Coleman, who was the first celebrity female mixologist, who created all kinds of cocktails in the 1900s, back when women weren't even allowed in cocktail bars. But when the Savoy Cocktail Book came out, which is still one of the most influential cocktail books in the world, the only name on the book was the man that worked beneath her. And I learned this true story, and as I was thinking about what I want to write about for my first book, I thought, I want to write about this, but there was very little known about her. So I created my contemporary main character named Cinnamon, who goes to the bar and learns the story much like I did, and uses this real life historical woman's journey to help her, confront her own demons and the things she's doing within her life. So that is Last Call at the Savoy in a nutshell.
Brisa, I loved it so much, and I'm so excited that we get to do this together. And I think you are incredible. And so I also just want to say I echo what you say. 11 books in, I still pinch myself that I get to do this too. And I assume that will never change. I hope that never changes because, as you said, the flair for the dramatic, we now get to do that and have it count as a job, which is pretty cool. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Giovanna and Susan and Adventures by the Book and Brisa. I'm so honored to share time with you. My story, It Girl, is inspired by, it's historical fiction inspired by the true figure of Evelyn Nesbit, who at the dawn of the 20th century in New York City, in this exciting moment when sort of everything was changing and crackling. You had, this young new president, Teddy Roosevelt. You had these new technologies and inventions that were kind of like shaking up the world and culture, like the automobile and the camera and electricity and the telephone. And you had Broadway becoming the global industry with its epicenter in New York City with, the Great White Way lighting up for the first time. And so into this moment, there is this crop of young girls who flock to New York, mostly with nothing. They are self-made. They are drawn there with ambition and talent and charisma. And unlike the way society had always been up until now, where really like the only young women who were attracting attention or really wielding any sort of power in society were essentially like the society brides, the debutantes, the daughters of the Astors and the Roosevelts and the Vanderbilts. Now you have this crop of young self-made women who are talented. They are performers. They are dancing on Broadway. They are posing as artists, muses, and models. And they were known as the It Girls or the Gibson Girls because of the iconic images that were put out by the artist Charles Dana Gibson. At the top of this sort of center stage of this whole crew of young women, you had this young woman, Evelyn Nesbit, who just captured the collective imagination in the way a Marilyn Monroe does, or in the way a Jackie Kennedy does, just this larger than life figure who every girl wants to be her, every man wants to be with her. And so Evelyn has this seemingly idealistic rise to fame,
That's right.
becoming this Broadway star. And then she gets pulled into this world of power and badly behaved men and, all the sort of dark undercurrents of society. And she gets pitted in this love triangle between these two particularly badly behaved men. And ultimately, she's put in between them in a situation where one of them shoots and kills the other on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden in front of all of New York high society. And she's framed by the press and the public as the cause of it all. So that's the true story. I took that and wrote my historical fiction novel inspired by her, hearing her voice kind of pulling her from the position that she was put in as the pawn between these two men. And I sort of extract her and put her center stage and finally tell her story as the central figure of what was known as the crime of the century, which became such a huge deal, such a huge scandal. And yet today, very few of us kind of know the circumstances and the details of it. So that's
except that we know a little bit about it because of the musical Ragtime.
Well, the Broadway producer does, just won the Tony. And when I'm researching books because I'm writing historical fiction, I only want to stick to like the straight nonfiction, the biography, the memoir. So I allowed myself to see Ragtime once the book was out and once it was like out of my hands. And I can tell later because it's a little bit off, but I had the most magical experience at Ragtime with Anna Grace Barlow, the character who plays Evelyn.
Yes.
Loved that. And yeah, it's my book is a little bit darker than just the girl on the swing. She's sort of a caricature, like kind of like humorous figure in some ways in that musical. There's the line ruined at the age of 15, which if you like parse it out, it's a tragic line, but it gets laughs in the show. This is going deeper into that and really going into her psychology, her heart, her mind through all of the tragic events that would lead to the crime of the century.
But I think it was really good timing, and you probably couldn't have known that Ragtime was happening because Broadway shows take forever, books take forever. But I think so many people must, as I did when I first saw the show in the original incarnation, as I was fascinated by Evelyn. And so to have this book, I was so excited when it even got announced that you were writing this because I've wanted to know so more about her for years.
Yeah, really the only people who know about her before this book, obviously, was Ragtime. But it was so nice of Broadway to put this show out. And it was so nice of Taylor Swift to put out Life of a Showgirl, because really before Taylor Swift, before the Showgirls, Evelyn was the first showgirl, first self-made pop culture icon that really defined what it meant to be the it girl, because this is the dawn of pop culture, the early 20th century.
And they were known as showgirls, right? That's not a modern.
Yeah, obviously it has evolved through the years. She was literally dancing in the Broadway shows. It wasn't like Las Vegas or like a burlesque situation, but she was dancing in the footlights of the Broadway shows when the men came calling and when this, toxic love triangle started to swirl around her.
Well, you have such wonderful friendships in both of your novels. You have Cinnamon and her sister Rosemary, and then you have Evelyn and Penny and It Girl. Did you find inspiration from your own experiences with, your either a sibling or best friend, and how did that play out in your novels?
So in mine, the sister story is very core to the contemporary part of it. And I don't have a sister. It's one of the most common questions I get is, oh, do you have a sister? Because their relationship is so lovely. I don't. I guess I wish I did. I do have a couple of very close girlfriends that I drew on for that. And also the sister who's pregnant with twins, I definitely on that drew on a friend of mine that had a complicated pregnancy and just what that feels like to witness, to be the person on the outside of and feeling like, what can you do for this person? But I loved, what I wanted was my character, Cinnamon, my main character, starts out she's a disaster. She's dealing with grief that she has not faced. She's sort of numbing herself with cocktails and parties, and her sister's the one who's always had it together. And then as her sister starts to fall apart with this difficult pregnancy and things with her marriage, Cinnamon is forced to step up and sort of be the sister in charge for the first time in her life. And I really wanted to write that from the perspective of she's always felt like her sister had her back and was going to just kind of save her from anything. And suddenly the moment she realizes, oh, I need to save my sister back, is a very sobering and life-changing moment for her. And so that's where the sister story came from me. And I think we've all felt that way with certain people that were like, oh, or even parents, like that whole thing of like, oh, they'll always take care of me. And then realizing it at some moment in time, it shifts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for me, this was interesting because so many of the characters I've written about previously, their arc really sort of launches when they get married. Cece becomes the Empress. Peggy hatches the treason with Benedict Arnold. Marjorie Post, it's the four. It's kind of like the anti-marriages that define her. And this was kind of Evelyn's show. This was not a story of her falling in love, because time and again that doesn't actually play out for her in the way you hope it will. And so what was interesting to me is I found this morsel in her memoirs about how when the crime of the century, this huge murder scandal happened in front of hundreds of eyes and in front of the media, and the police were on the scene immediately. In real life, Evelyn fled the scene and took cover. And it was just a one sentence detail that was written about how she took cover in the cramped New York City apartment of her one true friend, a former chorus girl with whom she had been in a company on Broadway. And I zeroed in on that. And the media was looking for her. Law enforcement was looking for her. These very powerful families with all the money and the influence and the power are looking for her. The public is looking for her. It was such a huge story and scandal at the time that it happened that President Teddy Roosevelt had to intervene and tell the media to give Evelyn a break and stop haunting her and hunting her, because it was like, on the level of like a Princess Diana car wreck, just a feeding frenzy. And Evelyn writes about how in that brief moment when she was in hiding in her girlfriend's apartment, she earned the nickname the Girl Houdini, because she had seemingly just vanished into thin air, which is very interesting in Ragtime that she has that number with Houdini about the two of them dreaming about running away. Because I like got the chills when I saw that. I didn't see that one coming. But she had the nickname the Girl Houdini, and she writes about how she just wanted to stay in her friend's apartment and bury herself forever and never emerge. And I thought how brutal her existence must have been if she's so longed to just disappear and escape and bury herself. And I was like, I really want to lean into that thread of her with being able to trust that one girlfriend. We all have that one ride or die girlfriend. If you're lucky, you have a few of them over the course of your life. And I realized that's really like the love story here, is like Evelyn realizing there is no man coming to be her knight in shining armor who's going to give her the happily ever after. This is a poisoned Cinderella story. And Evelyn, if she's going to find her way to a happy ending, it's going to be on her volition, and she's going to be the one who has to write this happy ending. So I conceived of this way of her and this friend to become the heroes of this story together. And it wasn't going to be, Prince Charming.
Mm-hmm. And I love that because it's sort of the female friendships are there. They're not front and center, but they ride throughout both of your stories. And I thought that was a nice way to do it, that they didn't need a love interest to be happy, but they needed a good friend, someone to have their back, so to speak. Now, you both chose landmarks, the Savoy, and then New York City, Madison Square Garden, the Met, all these wonderful landmarks. And they're sort of characters too, especially in the last call at the Savoy, definitely, with all the rich descriptions of the settings. I felt like I was sitting there. I looked it up and I was like, so how much, I know you do a great deal of research, but it's different when you have to get a sense of a place and time from over 100 years ago. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you, your research process, or had any experiences where you just felt like you were there in that time?
Well, I had spent a lot of time at the Savoy before starting the book, and because the Savoy Hotel was actually created to serve the Savoy Theater, because back in the day in the 1890s when the hotel was built, the Savoy Theater had already become very famous for a little writing duo named Gilbert and Sullivan, who were writing things like Private to Penzance and all those things. And so the theater impresarios, who were the producers of all those shows, thought, how can we get more people from outside of London to come and see? What if we build this luxury hotel? And at the time, there were no luxury hotels in London because nobody would go to London for vacation. It was rainy, it was muddy, it was dark. If you wanted to go on vacation, you go to the south of France or a spa town. You would never come to London. So they were really going out on a limb. But they were like, our theater's amazing. We're going to build this very theatrically inclined luxury hotel that's over the top, which they did. And they introduced crazy, just as a tangent, they introduced crazy things like putting a bathroom in every room. And people were like, why would anybody want that? That's ridiculous. Why would you want a bathroom in your bedroom? But obviously. And so I have been spending a lot of time at the Savoy because of the theater connection and because I'm a Broadway producer in my day job. And when you walk into the Savoy, if any of you here have ever been, you feel like you're walking back in time, literally just walking up the front driveway into the grand doors of the hotel. It's so historic. They've been very specific about keeping it the way it was. And also the hotel morphed through the 100+ years. It has staircases going weird places. They switch the front to the back and the back to the front again. Like, it's a very strange place that if you walk in, it's beautiful and you think, oh, this is an opulent, lovely hotel. But even just walking through the lobby, you'll start to ask yourself questions like, this is a little bit weird how this came together. So that inspired my curiosity already. And I didn't have to do a lot of research at first around the space because it is the same as it was. Like, they have really maintained it. But one of the other really remarkable things about the Savoy is that they keep a full-time archivist on staff. And so and I don't know any other luxury hotel that does that. And she's been there for decades and she's incredible. And she really cares about the history of the hotel. So she directed me to all of her favorite history books and all of those things. And so I had a lot of rich resources to work with about the history of the Savoy. But what I did not have to work with was anything really about Ada Coleman, this incredible, I mean, similar to what Alice is saying about like an it girl. Ada was the most famous woman in London during her time. She was a female mixologist. She put on a show. She had this personality, which makes sense when you think about a hotel owned by theater impresarios. She was a draw. She was a sideshow. And she was a really talented person. But in all the history books, most of them didn't mention her at all. And the ones that did had one line that said, oh, she worked at the bar making cocktails for 25 years. But little is known about her. And you can imagine, I read that and I thought, oh, no, this is not happening. We're going to have to figure this out. So really spending time in the Savoy, the research was about the history of the Savoy and then figuring out how to fill in this Ada Coleman shaped hole in that history. And I did that through fiction because I'm not a historian, but it wasn't hard to imagine what her life was when we knew everything that was happening around her at the time.
Yeah, and all the people who were there around her, the men who were around her.
All men, or only men allowed in the bar. But she was, fortunately for her, unlike Evelyn, she had a bar in between, and she was known for being no nonsense. She was not sexualized. And in the one picture that exists of her, she wasn't particularly attractive, but she was evidently just, yeah, exactly. She was pleasant. She was very pleasant looking, but she was not a sexual female celebrity. She was really good at making drinks and funny and good at deflecting sexual innuendo and all of that. She's kind of a guy's girl. And for all of those reasons, she was incredibly successful. She worked there till she was 50 years old to 1925, just unheard of. And then she erased.
Wow. Yeah. So Evelyn, when I was writing It Girl, it became very clear to me that New York City, and in particular in this moment in time, early 1900s, the dawn of the 20th century, that the city was really going to be more than just the backdrop of the story, but it was really going to be a character in the story. Not one locale, the way the Savoy is, but New York was really changing in this moment. And so you have this feeling at the dawn of the 20th century in New York that this is going to be America's century, and that New York is really like the city that is like the gateway to what is becoming the American empire. And everything in New York feels exciting in this moment. And Evelyn was not a New Yorker. She was actually born in what was known as Sooty City, Pennsylvania. She was from Tarentum, right outside Pittsburgh. And she was allegedly, the rumor was she was such a famously beautiful baby that people from the surrounding areas of Pennsylvania would flock to Tarentum, Pennsylvania, this coal town, to admire this beautiful girl. Tragedy strikes very young. Poverty. Evelyn quickly gets thrust into this really, really like dire situation where she becomes breadwinner, caregiver, parent to her mother. And the family moves from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. She's starstruck in Philadelphia when she gets a job as a young girl, lies about her age, and gets a job working in Wanamaker's department store. And that to her feels very cosmopolitan and sophisticated. And similarly, there's this new contraption called the elevator that Evelyn, as a shop girl, is so intrigued by. Just the glamour of the department store and these ladies who came in with disposable income to buy things like gloves and hats, and Evelyn can't even like feed her family. But from there, when she gets discovered as a model and a muse and she starts this meteoric rise to fame, she gets drawn to New York City. And so she arrives to New York City, and the papers described her as arriving with nothing but her good looks. And she was really referred to as sort of this tabula rasa, this blank slate. She became the fresh face when she started to work with the artists there, like Church, Beckwith, Gibson, and starring on Broadway and becoming sort of a fixture in the society pages and what were the precursors of like the tabloids and Us Weekly and People Magazine. She becomes this face where she gets then pulled into the higher circles of society, and so she's beginning to frequent these places that are new and exciting in New York City, like the Plaza Hotel, like Madison Square Garden, like Delmonico's, like, the 21 Club. And so she's totally taken in by New York City. And you have a girl who didn't know where her next meal was coming from. And now all of a sudden she's being wined and dined and feted by these men at places like Delmonico's, where she's, rubbing elbows with all of a sudden like the who's who of society. So New York really became the backdrop, in particular, because she then takes up with her benefactor, her patron, Stanford White, who was the architect who was building all of these iconic New York locations. So he built the Arch at Washington Square. He built the Plaza Hotel. He built Columbia Campus University. And he was known as the Pharaoh of Fifth Avenue. So he was really like the who's who among, if you were wealthy and connected, you wanted Stanford White building your millionaire mansion. So the locations really became a backdrop for Evelyn because it was so much a piece of the world into which she felt so taken and enamored and seduced, until she saw kind of how seedy it got behind the scenes.
I was very enamored and seduced by it reading your book too. I was like, oh, what a fun time that would have been to be in New York.
Yes, right. Yeah. And she was so young and naive, and she was 16, and she was totally without protection or means or savvy. And she wrote very candidly about how just vulnerable she was.
And you mentioned elevator. The first elevator in England was in the Savoy Hotel. They called it the Ascension Room.
Ascension Room.
The lift.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think those old-fashioned elevators probably worked better than the ones we have today, right? They hold up. They were pretty cool.
So both of your books have amazing stories, and they say truth or life is stranger than fiction. And I know that you wrote historical fiction, but a lot of what you presented was based on true accounts. So I'm just curious, especially in Last Call at the Savoy, I couldn't tell necessarily what was fictionalized completely and what was based on truth. For instance, with the Savoy Hotel, the Casper the cat.
He's real. Casper is real.
He was number 13, or to avoid having a number 13.
Wow.
So any other stories like that? I mean, I know aside from the famous people like Gucci's mentioned, and
those are all true. I mean, actually, the challenge I put for myself, because we didn't know that much about Ada's personal life. It was really important to me to put the things that we did know for a fact,
Hmm.
like Casper the cat, like the fact that she was friends with Churchill, like the fact that, oh my God, there were so many. The fact that she was, I don't want to spoil, but like one of the characters in the book passes away and she was left a very significant inheritance. That is real. We do know that
That
was true.
is true. Wow.
The hanky panky drink that she invented, that's true. So because we know so much, the Gucci story is true. And
Wow.
not that he necessarily gave her luggage, but that he was
Right,
working there
right.
at the time and he got
You
his
know.
start from handling luggage and thought somebody should do this better. So
Mm.
that's all the real history of the Savoy. And if not for my lovely editors, the book would have been twice as long because there were so many tidbits. I'm sure you found this too, Allison, with like the era
Yeah.
writing it.
Yeah.
And that was part of why actually the entire book, Let's Call It the Savoy, takes place inside the Savoy because there was so much to work with that I didn't even need them to step outside the door because
Mhm.
I could barely fit everything I wanted with what was happening at the time. It was such a rich time in history. So, but so yeah, the stories are true. And if you go to the Savoy, you walk in, you look to the right, and Casper is sitting on a table in the lobby
Really
this
there.
day.
The Savoy must be so thrilled you wrote this book. What has their response been?
They've been lovely. They've been very generous as far as, hosting me there. And I've been fortunate to be there with several authors around other related things. So Jodi Picoult and I had a hanky
Mm.
panky there talking about Ada Coleman. So all kinds of fun things like that. They've been great. I'm actually going to be there. I fly to London tomorrow. I'm going to be there this weekend. We're doing a toast to the book at the Savoy. So they've been absolutely lovely. And I talked to the archivist about the history, but I didn't tell her I was writing a book because, again, as it being my debut novel, first of all, I didn't even know if I was going to finish it or if anything was going to happen with it. But also, it's such an iconic place. I wanted to make sure that I had captured it right and that people that know what they're talking about in publishing thought that I had something before telling them because I didn't want to embarrass myself or offend them if I put together something that, wasn't going to be right and honor this incredible place.
I hear that. So it's the imposter syndrome never goes away, right? But it's like this push and pull between like you want to get as much information as you can, and you'd like their blessing, but you want to be taken seriously enough, so you have to have enough. Yeah, I totally hear that. For me, I say what you said all the time. The history is too good to be true. You couldn't make this stuff up if you wanted. And I tend to feel like I gravitate towards the women I'm writing about because I am so taken by the history that I think this is just so good. This has to be a book. I think the raw material is all there. And it's different with each book. It's a different negotiation depending on what is available, where the gaping holes are that you have to go in and fill with fiction. With Marjorie Merriweather Post, that's relatively recent history. Her daughter Dina Merrill passed away while I was working on the book. There is, Hillwood Museum, her final home, has a team of archivists where their job all day, every day is to preserve her history. So there was a bevy of information. There are literally mountains of information. There's buildings full of information. So versus like when I was writing The Queen's Fortune about Desiree, there were substantial portions of her history that were not accounted for, that were missing. So I like it both ways. Sometimes, and they each present their own challenges where you get to do more fictional imagining versus where you have to really wrestle with a very complete and well-documented historical record. And you know what? At certain points, like I think of it as like the tracks of the train tracks. Like here's the historical record that you are being handed by the sources and the raw material, and in this case, Evelyn's memoirs and all the biographies. And then here's your story that you're writing that's inspired by it. And sometimes the story runs really close to parallel, and sometimes the story takes you off in surprising directions that you're not running as close to parallel. But whenever you have to make that decision in service of the story, you have the author's note, and that's where you can explain and apologize. And as a reader of historical fiction, I love reading the author's note for exactly that reason. I want to know, what's real, what's not. And then of course I go down the internet rabbit hole. So what I'll say with this one is I did something for the first time that I hadn't done, which is I really played around with the ending. And that's why this is inspired by as opposed to based on. And that I explain why, without spoiling, because I know we have a mixed crowd of some have and some haven't read. That I explained my reasoning for in the author's note. And that was really just like the ending was what came to me with just living in Evelyn's story. I felt inspired to write it a certain way.
Well, we do have two questions in the chat or in the Q&A for both authors. This is from Jill. Is there anything you took out of the book you wish you kept in? When do you think about an idea for the next book? During the writing, actually it's three questions, editing or completion of the current book.
Do you want to start, Allison, since I've been starting?
Sure. Is there any, okay, so I completely hear what Brisa's saying, where if it were up to us, we'd probably have books that would be twice as long. I always reach this moment where I'm like writing the note in the margin to the editor, like, I think this is really interesting, but I think all of history, like, is this an info dump to people who don't think this is interesting? And they'll say either, you know, a little too in the weeds. You could probably make the point with one or two sentences as opposed to like, you know, one or two pages. And so I agree because I have a hard time when I get so close to the history where I think it's all so juicy and salacious. So no, with this book, there was nothing that I had to cut, no sort of like kill your darlings moment. If anything, I was actually urged throughout this by my editorial team to go in and put in more. And what they wanted more of was they wanted more scenes of Evelyn performing Brisa. But Broadway, they wanted more moments where you see her occupy her power as a performer and you see sort of what it was about her that enchanted people. You know, what was it that the men and the media blamed her for driving them mad? You know, what was this power she had? Because in her personal life and in her exchanges and relationships, she really did not wield a ton of power. She was a timid 16-year-old girl, but she got on stage and she could command the room. And so if anything, they wanted more of those moments so that we could understand how we get to the moment that men are literally murdering each other over her and blaming her because they said, you know, they were under her spell. So if anything, it was building that up. Idea for the next book. I have like a running list of women in my head who are talking to me at all times. And it's really whoever's shouting the loudest is who I'm like, okay, that's the one. I've met my next book. I've met my next leading lady. It's you. Once I get my book out, you know, because I don't know if many people know this, but once you finish your book and you have done your last edits and it is out of your hands, it takes about 9 months to make the physical book. It goes to, you know, print and production and warehouse and shipping and all the bells and whistles of the cover quotes and the cover art and the flap. So you have that period of like 9 months where then that's when I'm working on my next one. And I'm usually like having that idea germinate years out. So I have a complete draft for my next book at the moment currently. And then I know what's coming after that. So I don't know about Brisa, but like I have a list on my phone of women to get to if only time would allow.
Well, I hope you clear time because I want to read all of those stories. And I totally agree. There's no shortage of ideas. Like once I came to writing later, I'd already been a theater producer, done a lot of other things. I took an online 90-day novel writing class. I've been a huge reader thinking, oh, I'm just going to try this as a hobby, and ended up loving it. And once I felt like discovering a superpower you didn't know you have. And so, yeah, the desire to like tell more stories is amazing. But I'm sorry, did I cut you off before you were done?
Not at all. No.
But in the program that I did, their whole thing was write, especially when you're just getting started, write an hour a day. And so for me, that's been really helpful because to Allison's point, I was surprised by how slow everything goes in publishing. And my publishing trajectory has been really fast considering, but it still felt slow. I know that Broadway's slow, musicals take forever too. But I have enjoyed getting in the habit of just continuing to write and hone my craft, and I'm still learning. And you actually, yeah, by the time your book comes out, I already had the manuscript for the next one.
It's good to ride that momentum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Another question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, after the Trader's Wife, because I really like pushed a boulder up a hill to convince publishers with my first book, Trader's Wife, that the American Revolution would be an interesting time period. And they told me, only really David McCullough can sell the American Revolution. It's dense biographies about men, for men. Women don't really want to read about the American Revolution. I said, Martha Washington might not be sexy, Dolly Madison, I don't know, but Peggy Shippen and Benedict Arnold and John Andre, I'm telling you this, they almost changed the entire American Revolution. And so Trader's Wife came out and it did well. And then my publisher said, "Okay, you have proven that you broke down the door on the American Revolution. You can make this, this is going to be your thing. You're going to find your next woman and you're going to write about the American Revolution and you're just going to keep, stay in your lane." And I was like, "Well, I already wrote my next book and it's Empress Sisi and it's the start of World War I, the Austro-Hungarian Empire." And I just poor agent of mine, I've probably has whiplash because I've jumped across centuries and countries and eras, but really, I think it's just for each time it's been an organic obsession and a compulsion where the story gets its hooks in me and I know that that's the one that I have to write next.
Well, and I love it. It's very similar to the Hamilton story as far as like people be like,
yeah,
Hamilton about this person.
Yeah, now no one is saying that the American Revolution won't sell. And I love the Laura Camoy, Stephanie Dre that Susan's hosting later this month, Founding Mother. They do American Revolution so well. So yeah, I'm glad that that's no longer the banner.
The question for both of you, which character changed the most from first draft to final draft, and did he or she become a better person? That's from Anissa.
Anissa, do you want to go first, Brisa?
So for me, the contemporary sisters, Cinnamon and Rosemary, they were kind of the bones of it. And so they stayed around what I needed them to do. Ada was a historical figure, so she was what I needed her to do. But what was really interesting to me was when I did this online writing class, part of why I did it is because I was working for French royalty. I was working in Broadway, which is very collaborative, a lot of people involved, which I love. But I was looking for something that I could do that would be just for me, that there wouldn't be a million voices all the time, like waiting. I just wanted something where I could just sit quietly and be in my head, and the people on the page would do what I want them to do when I want them to do it. And joke was on me because when you're writing, like Allison was saying, they talk to you. Suddenly they don't at all do what you think they're going to do. So I will say, as far as the overall arc of it, it stayed the same, but the way that they got to where they were going, I never could have imagined that or, planned that out. Like once you get inside the heads of your characters. And it's been a really fun learning. If you had told me that before, I would have been like, "Oh, you're a crazy schizophrenic person." But actually, that's one of the joys of writing, of suddenly all these characters really have minds of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the character that probably changed the most was Evelyn, going back to what I said earlier, where her arc really begins from this unempowered young girl with really nothing, kind of no social or financial or political forces at her back. She's going it alone. And to reference this anecdote I was saying earlier about what my editor said is I had to sort of help. I needed her help in terms of moving the story along with her just becoming more of a force and more where we could get to the point at the ending where we believe that she could pull off the act she had to pull off. And so that was where my editor was calling for more scenes of her performing or her squarely fixed in the limelight where you see her occupying her power. Unfortunately, her mother didn't really change that much, sadly, and the two men, Stan and Hal, who were kind of the two love interests, if we can even call them that, they were pretty much, as Brisa said, they did what they had to do in service of the story. Penny, her best friend, had to sort of be a woven throughout constant, but not, she comes in and out of Evelyn's life. So probably the character that had to evolve the most was Evelyn.
And I have a question okay, so there's a question for Brisa, a burning question, which a few people have asked me about. Was Joe a figment of her imagination who gave Cinnamon all the information and stories about Ada? And also, how did she get those drinks made? Like who was Joe?
So yeah, I mean, no spoilers, but it's certainly a question I get a lot. And what I will say is, in creating the character of Joe, he also was one that evolved. Like he was, I didn't come up with him from the beginning the way he ended up being. But what I wanted was to represent bar lore, and that Ada's story, so many of these stories of the time would be told over a cocktail, which for me gave me some amount of artistic license, because when you're sitting at a bar, you hear the stories and it's like, it's close. It's like the idea of it, but it may be this way or that way a little bit. And so I like the idea, because we didn't know a lot about the actual person of Ada Coleman, that Cinnamon was both being told it from the perspective of bar lore and hearing it after a couple cocktails. And so it had that kind of blurred version of it, which is really all we know about her story. And I hope people read the book who are real historians and actually fill in the blanks. But so I wanted it to feel like the bar and the hotel were telling her those stories. So I can't say for sure whether Joe was real or not, but what I can say is Joe was based on a very real person in my life, a bartender named Joe, who, when I first moved to New York to be a Broadway producer, I came from Portland, Oregon, and I moved to Manhattan, and I was like, I'm going to be on Broadway, which was a really crazy thing to do in retrospect, but at the time seemed perfectly sane. And I learned that I wanted to be a producer. I learned that the producers and the theater owners and the business side people for Broadway would go to the second floor bar at Sardi's, which was around. I'm sure Evelyn probably went to Sardi's back in the day.
Uh-huh.
And I started hanging out there and just listening and learning and trying to figure out how to like rub shoulders with the people that I ultimately wanted to meet. There was no other way to meet them. And after a few weeks of just showing up like before, for the hour before the curtain would rise, finally this bartender Joe said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I want to be a producer." And he said, "Oh, okay, let me help you." And he introduced me to everybody and he told me these stories. And so all very different stories than what are in the book and what Cinnamon was learning, but that Joe was such an important person in my life, and it was fun to be able to pay homage to him in this story.
Oh, that is.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just thank goodness for Joe. That was so great that he took you under his wing and introduced you to everybody.
Yeah, he is incredible. And he had done that. He's done that for people before, and since he recently retired, and there's a big plaque on the wall because he was there for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Maybe there's a book written at the bar at Sardi's.
Seriously, absolutely. They
And
always say
then
like, oh, if these walls could talk in these historic institutions, but in a lot of them, it's like, just ask the bartenders. Like they actually
you know
know
everything.
they can talk.
Yes. And that is also one of the many things I love about historical fiction is if you're saying if these walls could talk, if you read historical fiction, you get to go into the rooms and hear the talking. You get to be eyewitness in the bedrooms and the boardrooms and around the dining room table and at the bar, and you get to, be a voyeur and witness these moments in history.
I think this is our last question for Allison regarding the ending and the twist. This is Dana, sorry. I loved the ending and the twist. I loved that. And she wants to know what made you change the history.
Thank you, Dana. Well, also no spoilers. I'm thrilled you loved it. I don't want to give it away for those who have not yet read it, but when the crime of the century went down and Evelyn was put in the middle of Stanford White and Harry Thaw, everyone knew Harry had shot and killed Stan. And, that was not a secret. He was not even going to try and deny that because he did it in public. He screamed, "You ruined my wife." And he pulled out his shotgun and he shot, Stanford White dead. And people thought at first that it was part of the show because they were at a dinner theater and they were just sort of shocked and screaming and it was quiet. And then they realized that this man had actually been murdered right in front of them. That's when Evelyn flees the scene. The security guard, in addition to the bartender, I think the security guards probably see a lot, Brisa, right? But the security guard who was there that night said, We always knew it would happen. We just figured it would be a father and not a husband. But that was, Stanford had it coming, to use another Broadway phrase. And so Evelyn gets put in this position after she tries to escape and gets, yanked out of her Girl Houdini fantasy where she's pulled from hiding. Harry Thaw, her rich, powerful millionaire husband, heir to, a Pittsburgh fortune, he coined the term playboy. He was the first known playboy because he had so much money that he could just literally like behave badly and play. But he claimed he had committed this murder in front of everyone in order to avenge his beautiful wife's honor. And that Stanford White had ruined his wife, as they say in ragtime, ruined at the age of 15. You have to read the book to see what happens. But he claimed that it was temporary madness. He could not say he did it without claiming madness of a sort because he would be given the electric chair. That would be the death penalty. But he was image conscious to the extent that he was from this powerful, blue-blooded family. They did not want to say that their, golden heir was insane. They could not go for an insanity plea because that would be more bad press for them. So the only way for them to thread the needle was to say it was temporary insanity motivated by his chivalric love to avenge his wife whose virtue had been besmirched. The key to this whole defense was Evelyn's testimony, and Evelyn claiming that truly her husband was avenging her honor because of what he knew about her past and because of what had happened in her past with Stanford White. And I found that to be so dissatisfying to think Evelyn goes through this whole thing. She survives so much. She overcomes so much to then just basically be pulled from her hiding place and put on the stand and have to justify the bad behavior of this man. And it all sort of, she has no power to resist. She has no power to stand up for herself and give her own side of the story. So I read Evelyn's memoirs. I read her words. I leaned into what I felt like was truly her message and her spirit. And I thought, why don't I let Evelyn lead me through this ending? And why don't I let her tell me how she sees it and how she would like this to go? Why don't we let her orchestrate this dance for once? And so but I really was, agonizing over this because I'm like, it's historical fiction. I'm writing about true people. And then I realized I had this thought, this light bulb went off, and I realized I write historical fiction. I write novels. I don't write biographies.
Yeah.
So I called up my friend Fiona Davis and panicked, chatted with her. And I was like, you write historical fiction inspired by, as opposed to based on. You change the names, you change the details, but you use the kernel of inspiration. I think I want to do that. And, I spoke to a few other authors and my agent and my editor. And they were all like, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to write fiction. And I was like, I had to give myself that grace. And then I was like, okay, this is going to be a very important author's note because I'm going to have some splaining to do. But that was where, this was my 11th book. And I thought, this will be a new muscle that I can flex. This will be a new experience to write it this way. I'm ready to do it. I want to do it. And so I'm thankful, Dana, that it landed for you. And that was my one big concern with this book was like, oh, will it work for readers that I changed the ending? If they're expecting one thing and they happen to have another. But if they like this historical fiction, then perhaps they'll be inspired to pick up a biography. And that's another thing I love about historical fiction is if it inspires you to learn more about the true history, then that's a win.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you so much. We're run out of time. I did want to close with two quotes, one from each of your books. This one is from Brisa's. I guess I'll never know what was real and what wasn't, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's up to us to write the stories we tell ourselves and to share the best ones with the rest of the world. And then this is from a letter that Evelyn wrote to Anthony Comstock. To shift roles, the girl has to put everything she's got into total transformation. It's a change of costume, tempo, scenario. Each time I'd face that same pesky fear that the audience wouldn't fall for it, and yet they always did. And then one other one, I think it's either Church or Gibson to Evelyn. Learn to move, to adapt, like water. In short, learn to swim, and then you'll survive. So thank you so much for those positive messages. and of empowerment for women, and for writing these fabulous books. And we'll look.
7:59.
Oops, that's my my cue. It's 7:59 p.m. This darn watch does what it wants. But thank you so much for joining us, and to Susan for allowing us to do this book club discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, all of you. Giovanna, exceptional job moderating today. Sorry, I feel like I'm losing my voice. Allison and Brisa, you were fabulous. I have to say, this is one of my favorite ABTB book discussions we've ever had. And I was just sitting back listening to you guys, thinking about it. What other profession do you have incredibly talented women like Allison, who's a New York Times bestselling author, 11 books, Brisa, a renowned Broadway producer and debut novelist? What other profession can you invite them with your book club, sit in the comfort of your living room, even in your jammies if you want, and chat with them intimately about all the things they've written about, they've researched, their experiences? I mean, if you guys don't schedule a book club visit with these two for your book club or your library, you are really missing out on something special, I have to say. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. We appreciate the support of our authors of literature. Thanks to Giovanna, thanks to Allison and Brisa. And also, don't forget, Sarah's been putting in the links how you can follow these authors and learn more about them. We do send a thank you e-blast afterwards that will include more information about how you can support these two authors, and also with a link to the recording of tonight's event in case you came late or want to listen again or share it with your other reading friends. But I appreciate you all. You can purchase their books on our website. Sarah has typed in the link, but if you couldn't find it, just go to adventuresbythebook.com. You can purchase copies of the author's books. So thank you again, everybody. August 27th, put it on your calendar for our next virtual pitch fest, where you can hear from 15 authors who you want to pick for your next book club visit besides Allison and Brisa. So thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Susan.
Bye.
Thank you, Giovanna. Allison, such a pleasure.
Bye.